Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual Enlightenment Salon of June 12th, 2022. We are pleased to offer a discussion today of an innovative new initiative, the Longevity Summer Camp, that will be hosted by the LessDeath organization. But first, I would like to briefly introduce our distinguished panel. We have our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia. We have our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker. We have our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. We have our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. And we have our Technology Advisor and Foreign Ambassador in Spain, Dr. Jose Cordero. Our special guest today is Mark Hamalainen. He is the founder of LessDeath. He is also the former director of science at Synthego. He studied biology at the University of Cambridge, and he received there his Master of Philosophy degree. So he has been involved in the longevity movement now for over a decade and a half. He, like myself, was inspired by the writings of Dr. Aubrey de Grey. So Mark, I'm very pleased to have you with us today. And please tell us about LessDeath and the Longevity Summer Camp.
Sure. Hey, I'm glad to be here. I guess like you said, I've been in the biotech industry for about 15 years now. And when I got involved, you couldn't really say that you worked in longevity. And so it's been really nice to see how the community has grown and become more socially acceptable, and funding is also really ramping up. And so I decided to take a break from doing actual technology development and help address another need that I've seen arising recently, which is people to actually do the work. So in the past, funding was the limiting factor. And now I think actually getting people up to speed on the same page and bringing people in from adjacent fields like various types of engineering and other sciences to help contribute to extending human lifespan and health. So I just founded LessDeath to sort of address that by running retreats and other programs where people that are not currently working on longevity but are passionate about the topic can learn more and get connected to opportunities to contribute.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. And I really like the name LessDeath. I think that's a goal that we could all get behind. And what I like also about that name is that it can unite a broad swath of individuals who are interested in the longevity field, whether they're interested in indefinite life extension, living as long as possible, as I am, or whether they might be interested in just some incremental life extension, like living 10 years longer or 30 years longer. They still support LessDeath. So could you comment about that approach and the constituency that your organization is seeking to engage with?
Sure. And just probably you get the reference to Less Wrong. I'm a bit of a fan of the community. I read the Harry Potter and Methods of Rationality by Eliezer Yudkowsky, and so I really enjoyed that. And so it was a bit of a reference to that, and also to the effective altruist community, because I've super enjoyed watching that community grow and the sort of beneficial impact they've had by trying to, I guess, be more rational about how we do social good, programs for social good. And so I wanted to apply the similar types of thinking for LessDeath. And yeah, like you said, to me, the idea, like, life is great and it's great to be healthy. And so I think just like the concept of trying to maximize health and lifespan, or just even improve it, yeah, is like kind of a very straightforward, positive thing to do to impact like the human experience. And so, yeah, we're pretty open to people coming from all different backgrounds, different skills, different motivations, and then trying to help them figure out for each individual person sort of what is the best way for them to contribute, considering all of those factors.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And it's interesting because at RadFest in 2018, I met with a Christian gentleman, and he and I had an extensive discussion about life extension and healthy living. And he and I certainly had a lot of theological differences, and he took issue with the goal of indefinite life extension. But ultimately, I asked him, well, would you like to live to the age of 200 in a healthy state and then see what you want? And he said that yes, he would. And I replied, well, then it means that you and I are allies and we have the same goals in mind, at least for the next century and a little bit. And then at that point, let's get together once again and speak about our respective goals and what we would want to do. But I think it's a great initiative to gather more allies and more participants in this field, as you mentioned. And Dr. Aubrey de Grey spoke about this recently as well in late 2021. The bottleneck in the field has shifted from funding, and a lot more funding has been forthcoming as of late, to talent. So could you talk a bit more about the talent bottleneck, how it arose, and what are some promising possibilities for overcoming it?
Sure. I guess I sort of think it's analogous a bit to the way the tech industry grew massively in the 2000s, and universities were not actually producing enough people with the skills that the tech companies needed. And so these sort of software boot camps sprung up. So I guess maybe like 5 or 6 years ago is when I first started seeing how successful the software boot camps were at sort of filling that gap. And at the time, it wasn't as obvious that we needed that for longevity, but it gradually became more and more obvious. So I thought, okay, well, how can we do something similar for longevity? And the difficulty is that there's not like, a particular programming language. There's not like a one size fits all boot camp that you could run to help solve the problem in longevity, because there's just so many different types of projects and skills that we need. So I came up with a slightly different concept, which was to have these shorter retreats where people can get a lot of experience, or get some contact with people that are ahead of them in the sort of the career that they want to have. So you can like meet somebody who's like 5, 10, 15 years ahead of you in the career that you want to have, and learn from them, and then be connected to opportunities to gain experience. So I think, yeah, so basically you collect people at these retreats, you get them sort of onto the same page about the nature of the problem, the nature of the different technology paths that we think need to be pursued. And then you connect them to like residencies, internships, or jobs where they can actually go and get some experience that matches their sort of skills and preferences.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think this is an important approach. Now, I'm curious, what is the target audience for the longevity summer camp attendees? So, for example, are you looking for people who are fresh out of college? Are you looking for people who might even be younger than that and are really considering what do they want to study in college? What do they want to major in? Or are you looking at older professionals, people who might have been more established either in this field or in an adjacent field? And finally, are you looking for just people who want to directly engage in the research, whether that be in an academic context or a startup context? or are you also looking for people who want to support the field in other ways, like advocacy, for example, or perhaps some administrative skills that could be brought to bear in helping a company flourish?
Sure. So ideally, I'd like everybody that's passionate about the topic to try to find how they could contribute. But obviously, we just started and we have limited resources, and it can only take a fixed number of people for this first camp. So we've decided that for the first event, we're going to focus mostly on people that have some level of career experience or graduate research experience. So graduate students, like PhD students, postdocs, and people that are sort of early in their careers. That's probably our main target audience, but we're not like discounting anybody. Like right now with applications, anybody that has like a lot of talent and a lot of enthusiasm will be seriously considered. So yeah, that's the current state of it. But we're definitely leaning towards technical and early career / graduate student right now. Mm-hmm. And yes, in the future, we'll have try to like expand that as much as possible.
Yes, thank you. And that's definitely a niche that would be well served by your program. Could you tell us more about the details of the summer camp? What kinds of sessions are you planning to have? What kinds of instructors are you planning to have? How are you going to structure this event?
Sure. So you can see all the instructors on the website, lessdeath.org. And it's a mix of people, biologists, engineers. We kind of wanted the instructors to sort of reflect the attendees. So like we have people from a sort of a broad range of backgrounds, physics, biotech, even some people like others start off in like the arts and then shifted into this industry. So it's a broad group of people. The camp itself will be split into there's 3 main days. The first one will focus on the biology of aging. So kind of sort of specifying the problem and making sure you have a realistic understanding of the nature of the problem. The second day will be more on technology development, like what are the sort of technology paths that have been proposed? What are people already working on? Where might more attention be needed? And then the third day will be focusing more on the social aspect, like what is your we'll have sort of effective altruist inspired workshops where people can think about what their personal impact strategy might be. And as well, we'll think about sort of the community, talk about how the community, what bottlenecks exist to progress and how as a community we could maybe alleviate some of those.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the question of bottlenecks to progress is a very important one. Indeed, there have been some in the community who have wondered essentially why the current level of advancement isn't further along than it is. And it is an interesting question because some of the bottlenecks are not technical, they're more institutional or societal or even political. And that's what we in the US Transhumanist Party are trying to overcome. And I have one more question before we go to audience and panel questions, and that is with regard to the application process and the application deadline. So if somebody wanted to apply for the longevity summer camp, what would they have to do and how soon would they have to do it?
Sure. So there's an application form on the website, lessdeath.org. It takes only about 5 minutes, depending on how much you want to write into there. And we currently have the deadline set to June 21st. So it's a little over a week still open for accepting applications.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And I will post a link to the application here shortly. But before I do that, I would like to pose this question from our friend David Wood, who asks, which existing longevity organizations did you, Mark, review before deciding it was important to create a brand new longevity organization?
Sure. I'm friends with people in a lot of the different organizations, like the Lifespan.io. They run a great conference, which is coming up later in August. Nathan Chang is a good friend of mine who runs the On Deck Longevity Biotech program, which I think is probably the closest to what we're doing, although they are very startup focused. And what I'm trying to do is something I would call it's analogous to the organization 80,000 Hours that some people might have heard of, which is in the effective altruist community, and they provide sort of guidance to people who want to have a career, a socially beneficial career. And so yeah, I looked at that. I mean, there certainly are a lot of organizations in the community already, but I felt like it was probably like I had a very specific idea for what I wanted to do, and I thought it would be beneficial. So it's kind of an experiment. I wanted to run this experiment and see if my vision, if people like it. I am actually quite open to potentially merging with another organization at some point if there's good synergy, and that would allow me to scale. But basically, this first retreat is sort of an experiment, and if it goes well, then yeah, we'll see where it goes in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that response, Mark. And for those who are interested in applying to the Longevity Summer Camp, here is the link. Now, how many open spaces do you have, and how many of them are still open for those who might be interested to apply after watching this video?
Sure, we have we've kind of been just doing a bit of a rolling process here. So people are applying, and we've been sort of looking through the applications. We have 50 spots, and we already have over 100 applications. So we're already not going to be able to take everybody who applies, but we've just been like working our way, interviewing the candidates, and when people are sort of a very clear fit for the intended purpose of this retreat, then we invite them to register. And at this point, I think about 30 of the spots are definitely taken. So there's up to 20 remaining. But yeah, it's kind of like changes each day right now. So, but it's not all taken.
Well, interesting. So congratulations, first of all, on getting that kind of response. That is impressive. And that suggests to me that the talent bottleneck doesn't arise from a lack of interested individuals. In fact, even for the US Transhumanist Party, I get emails fairly frequently from people asking, well, what can I do to help the field? I think the talent bottleneck arises these days from a lack of established channels by which interested individuals could translate their interest into something concrete, something productive for the field. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I going back to the earlier question about like what other organizations exist, like like I said, I'm friends with people in other organizations, and a lot of them get a lot of these kind of contacts as well, where people contact them asking them how they can help, and they often only have a fairly limited number of answers. Often the first one is donate to our organization, but like actual work and project opportunities is not always one of the answers, which is partly that's because in the past funding was limited, and now that funding is not, I think it takes a bit of time for the community to adjust to that and figure and create these channels for people. And so that's why I kind of just wanted to jump right in and just start doing that.
Yes, indeed. And I agree with you. It has been a bit of a seismic shift, even in terms of my thinking about how to approach this field, because my previous outlook was essentially I should just have a decent upper middle class income and then donate some of that to longevity organizations like lifespan.io, to which I make a regular monthly donation, or the Methuselah Foundation. That's another example of a great organization to donate to. But if the funding bottleneck is no longer such a bottleneck, then the next task should be how to attract more people to the field. And we have another question from David Wood. could at least some of the knowledge gap regarding answers to how could I help be provided not by an in-person boot camp, but by a series of online videos? So it seems he's suggesting a supplementary approach. Do you think the two could work together? Do you think there could be a follow-up component to the summer camp that involves more remote types of learning opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. And that's already part of the plan. Because the thing is, you can only reach so many people at a time through in person, just like that's just more difficult. And so all of the material that we produce as an effect of like doing these retreats will be made available online, because my goal is not to like create a walled garden. My goal is to like help as many people get involved as possible. So yeah, basically everything that we produce will be made available in an online format. But I think there is a lot of benefit to the in-person, especially in terms of forming the social bonds. Like I went to the Sens 2 conference way back in 2005. And I made a bunch of lifelong friends there and these are people that I have gone on to like work with on projects. We've hired each other. We've, supported each other when we needed support. And so I think there's a value to the in-person, smaller, and that's another reason why we're doing only 50 people at a time. We're going to do multiple events per year is the plan, but keep them smaller, because then you actually get to really know people. And I think those social relationships are really important for like having sustained career change and like, and to make long-term progress.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And one of our viewers, Ampero, echoes the comments that you made, and he points out there's currently a lack of connection and networking within the transhumanist community. So hopefully the longevity summer camps will be able to facilitate that. He also wonders, what about the possibility of high school and college transhumanist outreach programs? Have you given that some thought, at least in the longer term, or outreach programs for those interested in a longevity career, however you want to frame that?
Definitely. I mean, you can, like, the earlier you reach somebody, often sort of the more impact you can have on their trajectory. I mean, I came across life extension in high school, and so that certainly had a big impact on my career trajectory. I have ideas about this. Right now, I'm kind of focused on making sure this first retreat goes really well, so I just haven't had time to flesh that out. But for instance, I have a friend at an organization called Impact Labs, and he suggested that what we do is run sort of book clubs where we just mail boxes of books and papers and maybe some like boxes of tea, so that people can have have sort of meetings or LessDeath chapters. That's certainly an idea. I'm open to suggestions from people, and I know LessDeath is not the only organization that is interested in doing this kind of stuff, so it could be a collaboration with another organization as well.
Yes, excellent. And indeed, to share a personal story, I became acquainted with the SENS approach when I was in high school, late high school. So the summer after my junior year, I had just taken advanced placement biology. I passed the AP test with a 5, which for those who don't know is the highest score possible on that test. And it was an interesting course. I definitely learned a lot. I learned enough to be able to read Aubrey de Grey's writings and understand what he was discussing with the 7 strands of the SENS approach. And it resonated with me because everything he wrote was completely consistent with what I had learned in my AP biology coursework. And when I read his writings, I realized, well, this isn't science fiction anymore. And even if there's a 50% probability of reversing senescence within 30 years, at that point, his time frame was a 30-year time frame, then this is enough of a chance that one should devote a lot of one's time, a lot of one's resources to pursuing that endeavor. So for me in high school, that made an immense difference. And of course, when I reached out to Aubrey is very approachable. He responds to most of the inquiries and offers to collaborate that he receives. And I found this to be a very welcoming field. So hopefully in the future, more people who are in that position now that I was in 2004 will have those kinds of outreach opportunities. So now I would like to offer the opportunity for anybody from our panel to ask Mark a question. Who would like to go first? David.
Yeah, I'll take that. Hey, Mark, thanks for being here. I like the idea of what I hear that you're doing. Just for reference, I come from the technology field myself. That's where I spent a lot of time. And I do remember trying to bring in people from allied fields. One of the benefits I saw to that was a different way to approach problems than some of us that had been in that field for a while. And that creativity, that novelty of approach in some organizations was well accepted and not so well accepted in others. But I think it had a positive impact. And I'm wondering if you see that as one of the intended benefits, but just besides raw manpower, but also bringing in different ideas, different approaches from other areas.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I'm particularly interested in getting people with sort of backgrounds from math, physics, chemistry, electronics, areas where people have much faster iteration time on their development. So like biology has, I think one of the big problems in biology is how slow development cycles are. And I'd like to bring people in that are not used to that and might be frustrated by that and might want to work on ways to improve that actually. So I think we need, I think we could benefit from people from other industries. That's just one example.
Yeah, I see a great advantage to that. I think Aubrey's background was that way, if I remember right. And obviously that's worked well, and it's changed the focus of the industry, if you will. So yeah, great idea. Anyway, thanks again for being here.
Yes, indeed. And thank you, David, for your remarks. Now we will go to Dr. Jose Cordero.
Okay, greetings from Madrid, from Spain. And Mark, congratulations on this initiative. In fact, there were some similar initiatives in Russia. I don't know if you're familiar, Open Longevity. Mm-hmm. And they would actually put together a whole bunch of very intelligent people and have maybe 3 days or longer to talk about the theory of aging, the technology, what is happening, also for their personal lives, what they could do right now. They were very successful first in Russia, and then they began taking some of these seminars, these workshops, these camps outside. And they had done several in the Balkan area. And then they asked me to organize one in Spain. Obviously, this was before COVID and before the war. But are you familiar with that? Have you heard of Open Longevity? Otherwise, you should check it out because it was also a very interesting initiative.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's funny, the longevity community, although it is growing really fast now, it is still a small community. I'm friends with Anastasia from Open Longevity. So yeah, I like what they do, and maybe we'll be able to collaborate to sort of like offer or maybe collaborate on future retreats in other locations other than the United States. I'd definitely like to reach people around the world. But most of the people I'm working with in terms of camp counselors are US based. So it'd probably be helpful to collaborate with other organizations to go out to other places.
Yes,
well, following up on that, the Russians, they wanted to organize that in the Canary Islands. In Spain, Tenerife, one of the Canary Islands, is a really wonderful place. It really is waiting for immortality, for longevity. And there is a big foreign community. in the Canary Islands. Half of the population during the summer is foreign. So it is a very good place. And then also, let me tell you, in Spain, we do have a growing longevity community. And not just in Spain, you probably know also in terms of conferences. We have one big one in Spain, but there are also in Great Britain, in Germany, on doing aging that now is being redefined. I think it has a different name. I forgot right now what it is. Also in Portugal, and then even in Poland and Russia. So there is a growing international community. So we would love to have you here also in the Canary Islands.
Sure. Send me an email, mark@lessdeath.org. And like I said, I'm pretty focused on just getting this first retreat to go, but I've definitely been thinking about like a European one next year would be awesome.
All right. Thank you, Mark and Jose. Now, in terms of other initiatives that could contribute to the advancement of longevity, one of our viewers, Din Vision, has a question about Saudi royals planning to spend $1 billion per year to extend healthy lifespan. And there has been some news coverage of this. MIT Technology Review recently had an article about this. It's a fund called Hevolution. I wonder what the origin of that name is, but it is illustrative of the increasing international scope of the longevity field. I'm curious, with regard to your thoughts on this, Mark, do you think this could help alleviate the talent bottleneck, and how could an initiative like this synergize with longevity initiatives in the United States?
Well, I mean, it's actually increasing the talent bottleneck issue because all this money is flowing in, but who are they going to hire to do the work? But which is a good thing, though. It's a good problem to have. I mean, it's nice to see that other parts of the world are starting to get interested, and it's not mostly just happening in the United States. But it's going to take time to build up. I mean, you can't just overnight, build a Stanford or build an MIT. So I think the people in the other parts of the world definitely, there's a lot of work to do, but I'm glad that it's getting started.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And our friends David Wood and Jose Cordero have both clarified that Hevolution means health plus evolution. So thank you for that. And now Didier Kernel wonders, could you perhaps invite, without cost to them, one or two people from the Open Longevity Organization during your summer camp? Have you given some consideration to that or made contact with any of them?
Yeah, actually, I already just made a note that I should ping Anastasia, or I don't actually know that many people in the organization. So if there's somebody specific he had in mind, feel free to email connect me, mark@lessdeath.org. We do have some scholarships available through Collabra. They're sponsoring people that are specifically doing startups, even though that's only it's not our specific target market, but certainly some of the people coming to our camp are entrepreneurs. So there's scholarships available through Collabra. We're running basically at cost right now. And it's also a very inexpensive event. It's only $250. But VitaDAO offers fellowships, I know. So if people are, you can apply. There's a link on our website where you can apply to a VitaDAO fellowship. And in some cases, they'll cover travel expenses for people. So that's another option. But yeah, certainly happy to talk with anybody and try to figure out a way, especially if there's a potential collaboration, and we try to make it work.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. And now let us go to our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. Ben, please proceed.
I just checked out that Open Longevity thing, Jose, and we did have Jason Mercurio on our salon 5 months ago or thereabouts, and he's a volunteer with Open Longevity, so kind of cool there. I'd been sharing with Mark that I'm going to go to his camp in 2024. I have my vacation time booked until then, but it looks pretty sweet. Like I like checked out the brochure, and I'm kind of digging like a camping thing. And I was kind of wondering just a little more of the details of like the hanging out, Mark. Like, will classes even be held outside, or will it mostly be inside? And like, we'll be like, well, if it's an awesome temperature. And then like, I mean, I don't know about like forest fires and stuff in California, if we got to be worrying about that, if you have a backup location, I don't know, all these other things, just some of those logistics I'm curious about.
Sure. It's it's a super beautiful location. It's adjacent to Tahoe National Forest, a little under 5,000 feet elevation. It is going to be mostly outdoors. We're breaking people up into small groups, so you'll be in groups of like 8 with 7 attendees with 1 camp counselor, and the camp counselors will be sort of discussing their area of expertise and maybe presenting a practical exercise or a group thought experiment as a way for people to sort of dive into their areas and get to know that person and learn from them. So you'll just have a bunch of those workshops spread throughout the day. And there's also like trails there, so you can take a little break to go on a walk. We're going to have yoga in the morning. It's going to be kind of a nice, healthy off-grid sort of experience. Get away from your screen, get away from your phone, and try to like just engage with the people that you're with and think deeply about these questions and technology directions. Forest fires, yes, that is a real risk in California. Unfortunately, I just haven't had time to venue is like a big deal, right? Like it's that a lot of the work is getting the venue set up and arranged, and to try to do 2 at once to have a backup is just kind of outside of my bandwidth, unfortunately, although I definitely considered that. So just fingers crossed that California is not on fire this later in July.
Yes, this is actually a serious risk, and I know because I live in northern Nevada, so every time there's a major wildfire in Northern California, the winds unfortunately carry it into the populated areas of Northern Nevada. So we are not at nearly as much risk of having our properties burn, but we do have to face the smoke inundation. My recommendation would be, if there is a wildfire, most likely it's not going to be in the immediate proximity of the camp, but the smoke is definitely a greater risk. I would suggest at the same venue having a contingency plan where you would be able to take everybody indoors, run some high-powered air purifiers, and as a result, I think the attendees would be protected.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, we could just set up some big wedding style tents and just put some big air purifiers in there. And I am looking into alternate locations for the future. So we are going to have, like next year, there'll be more than 1 location option. I just haven't had the bandwidth really to set that up, because I've been thinking about this idea for a long time, but I actually only started working on it full time in February.
Yes, indeed, that is a short time frame from idea to realization. So congratulations on getting this far with it, getting all of the instructors and the venue lined up in that time period. Now let us go to Art Ramon Garcia.
Yeah, have you considered getting a YouTube channel and becoming like a YouTube influencer? Because Googling right now on YouTube, we come up. I see London Futures come up, but not too many other who puts out continuous content. So I think that's something we're missing, is kind of a YouTube transhumanist influencer to just talk about it. Because there's only like 3 really that I see come up. And also, have you considered maybe doing any sort of metaverse camps in one of the platforms? And, in case, let's say, have it as a backup in case there is a wildfire that threatens your actual camp, so that you could have a backup in the metaverse. So any thoughts?
Oh, well, like I said earlier, like we are going to produce content. There will be some video content recorded at the event, and that kind of stuff we probably will be putting online. In terms of being an influencer, I don't know if that's really my personality type. I'm all this like sort of marketing and being interviewed is very new to me, and I've traditionally been like somebody who's just in the lab doing technology development, and maybe I seem extroverted, but I'm not an extrovert. I'd rather just be like sort of plugging away, working on the problem in the background. But certainly if our organization grows, I could potentially hire people that are more inclined towards that and just help with the sort of like what the content would be. And then as for the VR, again, like I think I played video games a little bit as a kid, but like I never, then I kind of just fell off of that when I got interested in life extension and just focused on working. And so I've not actually kept up with VR since the main use case of it has been games. But I definitely am excited for the potential of VR being more, I guess, higher fidelity in terms of like not just video, but like having something that's more similar to like a in-person experience. And I probably should actually try out some of the latest technology because I honestly just haven't tried it. Because if it's starting to get close, then that's definitely a viable option in the future. I just haven't tried it, so I should probably do that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mark. And now I would like to ask Jason Geringer if he has any questions or comments.
How long is it? And like what will you guys gonna have like classes or what would you learn? What are you guys gonna teach if there's classes, and what else are you gonna do while you're there?
Sure. So it's basically 3 full days of programming, like formal programming. Like I said before, there's a biology day, a technology day, and a sort of individual/community social day. And so, yeah, so that's pretty short. But the idea is right now we're taking people that are already technical people. And so they already have a sort of engineering or scientific mindset that operates as a scaffolding. And what we do is kind of we allow them to like sort of populate that scaffolding with some specific to longevity information. And then, so like probably in the future, I'd actually like to do longer ones. But again, like you can go find, like if you need biology 101 or chemistry 101, like there's MIT open courseware, there's Coursera, there's Khan Academy. I don't think that's like the sort of high leverage, unique thing that LessDeath should offer. We could, if somebody comes to us and clearly needs that, we can say, hey, why don't you go study these things on your own through these already well-established high quality programs that exist, and then come back to us later, and we can sort of get you boosted up into the longevity community, because that's where there's not already existing programming that's very widespread.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And for those who are interested in some of the details, I've posted a link to the schedule and the overview of events that has been made available on the LessDeath website. I will also say, Mark, that I am an introvert like you. Actually, I like to tell people that I'm an introvert who has learned to sometimes act like an extrovert, but very much my personality is also introverted, in the sense that what I prefer to do is actually solitary work on projects, but I recognize the need for external engagement. And when I was offered the opportunity to be the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party, I realized essentially that if I'm not going to be doing this work, then who will? And hopefully the answer is many other people, but we need ourselves also to inspire them. So I appreciate that you are doing this, and hopefully we in the Transhumanist Party can provide inspiration for advocates of longevity the way that you are trying to provide guidance and career paths for researchers and technologists. So a question along these lines would be, what would be a good set of synergistic interactions between the researchers and the advocates? What kinds of networks, forums, venues, ways of communicating do you think would be effective in getting the advocates to understand the latest developments in terms of the research, giving them essentially a high-level overview of what the current extent of progress is, where the bottlenecks are, what the research community needs, and where they would like to essentially pursue those resources or opportunities?
I mean, I guess to a large degree, that's like kind of what LessDeath is trying to do, right, with our program. But we're obviously only able to reach so many people. Might sound silly, but like books are great. Like if you're really serious about this topic, there's not a shortage of information like sources out there. Like, you know, Ageless by I think it was Andrew Steele came out recently. It was a very good overview of the longevity field. And you can, like, technology development, biology, we have institutions where you can learn this stuff. So I think one thing we want to offer is sort of one-on-one guidance, where if somebody just is like, you know, trying to figure out where to get started, like they can book a call with somebody from LessDeath and we can talk to you for an hour or half an hour or whatever and kind of give you some advice. But like, if you're really serious about it, I mean, you just have to do it. Like, you have to, like, maybe you have to go to school again. Maybe you need to try to find a job where you can get workplace experience. Yeah, I'd say just rip the Band-Aid off and just do it. Like, we need an army if we're going to have any chance of achieving these things in our lifespan. If we want to extend health and lifespan before our time's up.
Yes, indeed. Ben, you are an example of somebody who has decided to just do it. So please.
Yeah. I think so. It was December of 2019, just before COVID, and I saw that I could get access to the university libraries for like, it might have been like $60 for the year or something like that. And I was like, you know, when I have access to all of the peer-reviewed journals there, plus all the books that they got on their shelves, I mean, I was like, sweet. If I only got to pay $60 to just jump in and find all the things. And I mean, I think when I was starting to tell other people online about it, I was like, I mean, it is a big old rabbit hole. So just be ready for where you're going to start finding different sources of information. And some are a little harder to get as much out of as other things. But yeah, totally. Like Ageless is a good place, a really good book. I wonder how much you need to have like a biology background before you start reading these books and get into them as much as I felt like I got into them. But then, yeah, you do have that, the Coursera's, the Khans, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, deciding to dive into it, that's pretty darn key.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, like that's what I did when I actually read the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson when I was about 13 years old, and that was kind of I had the concept of longevity and life extension in my head before that, but that really triggered me to be like, oh, the characters in those books were like actually doing it. They were actually developing this technology. That was part of the story, and I realized like I could be a character just like that. I could just do it. And so I just started ordering university textbooks, and I got a subscription to Nature, and I read the books cover to cover. I read every issue of Nature cover to cover. And after, 5 years, it started to all click into place for me. Obviously, there's still more unknown about biology than is known, but it started to, I started to understand enough that I could make meaningful contributions. And it is a long path. So yeah, take chemistry 101, take bio 101, learn engineering skills. I think engineering, data, and automation are going to be key because when I started my PhD, I was doing, manually pipetting, feeding my cells, moving plates of cells from one instrument to another. And I kind of had this realization that if I if this is the way we do research, we're not going to get any meaningful progress within my lifetime. And so I actually dropped out of my PhD at Cambridge and came to, I got a master's instead. And then I came to California to work on technology development. For instance, at Synthego, where we were basically trying to build, we fully automated all of the reagent production and laboratory. The lab was just automated. Like the idea was no human hands in the lab. Like you should be controlling the experiments from a computer.
Quite interesting. Thank you, Mark. And I've posted a link for those who want to explore the Mars trilogy. The Wikipedia entry is just a place to start. Of course, it has links to where you can obtain the books. David Wood writes, +1 to the recommendation of Ageless by Andrew Steele as a great starting point into the science of aging. And Daniel Twett writes, thank you for your simulated extrovert service. I think that was in part directed toward Mark and in part directed toward me. So thank you to Daniel. And Daniel also wonders, has anyone written a book for dummies on the topic yet, on longevity? And of course, books like Ageless and Ending Aging by Aubrey de Grey and Michael Ray, they certainly do require some background knowledge. So is there a book for somebody who is just very new to the field, somebody who might not have even taken a high school biology course yet? And I know there's Death is Wrong, which is my illustrated children's book, but that is very basic. I have a 2-page appendix there about SENS, but what I think Daniel is asking for is something intermediate. So for a layperson who is interested in the subject, but doesn't have the technical background yet.
I mean, I guess I don't know that there's a shortcut. Like, it depends on what your goal is. If you just want to become able to understand a little bit more about what people are discussing versus if you actually want to get involved in the technology development. And if you want to get involved in the technology development, there's no way, like if you're starting from a layman level, there's no way around that. It's going to take years. Yeah. So to get started, there's lots of Courage Scott, I think, is a YouTube channel that does some really fun videos. They have a why should we die and can we cure aging videos. I'm sure somebody can find, I don't know how to spell it. It's a horrible name, but it's really, really good YouTube channel, animated explanations of all kinds of scientific things. So that's a good area to get like sort of excited and inspired and maybe get some conceptual understanding. But yeah, if you want to do technology development, I don't think there's any way around the fact that you just need to get biology 101, chemistry 101, start there and keep working forward.
So this YouTube channel that you mentioned, is it Kurzgesagt? Is that the name in German? Yes. So I will.
So that is German. I've been wondering. I've seen that channel before. I've always wondered what it was. Yeah.
Yes, it's German. Kurz in German is short, and gesagt is the past tense for said or stated. So stated concisely, that would be the translation. I will provide a link to that.
In a nutshell, maybe.
Yes, that's actually how they translate it into English. Ben, you have some desire to discuss Synthego, so please go ahead.
I just want to have Mark go ahead about Synthego.
Sure, yeah. So Synthego, I guess, probably exists because of a previous company called Halcyon Molecular, where there was a group of us that would meet in the evenings for a beer to talk about the future of synthetic biology. And Halcyon was a really exciting company, but I think over ambitious. We were trying to do too many different types of technology development at the same time in the same company. So Halcyon ultimately ended up running out of money, but then some of the folks that went to these synthetic biology like evening meetups, which we ended up starting a new company. Paul and Mike Dabrowski were the ones that started it, and I was initially just an investor and then joined full time. And we had the vision of try to do the necessary technology development to turn biology into something more like information science, where you just have warehouses full of fully automated machinery that's just cranking away at biological experimentation and updating an in silico model of biology, and that it's all just driven by AI. And so we want it to be fully vertically integrated, fully automated. But our concept was, how can we pay for that? Because that's like a huge project. And so we decided we're going to build one piece of this factory at a time, and design it such that that piece by itself also is has a business case. And so the first thing we did was try to do really high quality, low cost synthesis of DNA and RNA nucleotides. And we just by luck got really, really good at making RNA right when CRISPR was discovered and became popular. And so all of a sudden there was this huge demand for high quality, long RNA. And we happened to just have the best quality on the market. Really, it was lucky. And so we kind of pivoted or kind of accelerated our schedule to focus on genetic modification as a service, which was actually going to be a little bit further down the line, but we just jumped right into that. And I worked there at the beginning, the onset of the organization. So I was there for about 3 years. Then it grew to this point where I felt like it was going to do well on its own, and I was also feeling a little bit burnt out, so I decided to take a break. And so Paul Dabrowski, who was actually a SpaceX, Paul and Mike Dabrowski, who are early SpaceX employees, who are the founders. They did a pretty good job, and it's been quite successful.
Yes.
The long-term vision is still there. It's just they're doing it one step at a time. Unlike some other companies like Emerald and Transcriptic that are trying to do full cloud laboratories, right from the get-go, which is, I think they've had some success as well, but it's also I think it's more challenging than the route Synthego took.
Yes, thank you. That is definitely an interesting overview. I'm curious with regard to your thoughts on a broader question, and that is with regard to the longevity of startups. You mentioned Halcyon Molecular, which was quite ambitious, but it did close its doors 10 years ago, and there are various opinions about why it did not persist. But do you see the high failure rate of startups as a significant risk factor in this community? Because if a startup is working on a particular approach and that approach doesn't succeed, at least to the point of enabling the startup to persist, and yet that approach generates valuable information that could be useful to the broader community, is there a knowledge continuity problem there in terms of getting that information passed to the rest of the community or people who might be interested in creating another startup or just pursuing the research with some institution? And if there is that kind of continuity problem, how could it be overcome?
Yeah, I think that is a problem. For me, I would say Halcyon Molecular, for me and the other people there, it was very much a very positive learning experience where we just tried a lot of things, learned a lot through the process, and then a number of people that were at Halcyon went on to do really cool projects. And even the electron microscopes, we were designing a new type of electron microscope there, and that ended up being spun out into a new company called Voxa, which now uses those microscopes for brain connectome imaging. Synthego kind of was probably exists because of the people that met each other at Halcyon and learned together there. So it's definitely never a complete waste, but it could potentially be more efficient, and you could potentially pass that learning on to more people if it was, it's not like somebody wrote a book about everything that happened at Halcyon so that other people that weren't there could benefit. I think the industry actually needs more nonprofit projects, like long-term, persistent, big nonprofit research projects that do, as part of what they do, share their learnings freely, because they're not for profit and they don't have an incentive to wall off what goes on inside of them. And I'm really excited by organizations like Convergent Research and Astera doing these, I guess the term is focused research organizations, where it's a funded for some amount of time project that is meant to solve a technological or scientific bottleneck and make that available to the communities so that we can all make progress faster. I think although there's a lot of money flowing into longevity research or longevity technology development right now, I think it would be better if a larger portion of it was going to that sort of thing, so that the whole community benefits no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. I do agree that the focused research organization concept is a promising one, and also donating to nonprofits that have greater longevity because they're not required to turn a profit quickly is a wise idea. Of course, it's also wise to select the nonprofits that one donates to carefully to make sure they actually carry out the mission that one would like them to carry out. I do once again recommend lifespan.io and the Methuselah Foundation as two organizations that have certainly demonstrated an ability and willingness to carry out their respective missions quite well. We have another question from Jose Cordero.
Yes, hello. Hi once again. And Mark, it is good to know and remember that you were involved with Halcyon. I actually visited twice when I was at Singularity University. I am one of the founding faculty of Singularity University, and I was there for the first 5 years. And we actually went to visit with every summer course Halcyon. And so I have very good souvenirs about Halcyon. And now, in a way, that we have Ultima Genomics. Are you familiar, I guess, with Ultima Genomics? They have finally announced that they are going for the $100 sequencing for the human genome. So that is the question. And also talking about books, entry books, you can see it behind my back. I have a fantastic book with my great British co-author, David Wood. Our book is called The Death of Death. It is published already in half a dozen languages and coming soon in another half a dozen languages. And not yet in English, even though it is also in English, the manuscript, but it has not been published yet for a big publishing house. So that is another question. If you know a big publishing contact in the USA, we are welcome to talk to you and to them. But anyway, so Ultima Genomics and book publishing.
I have not published a book, so I unfortunately can't comment on that. Although, like, there's a lot of, I'd just get in touch with somebody who has published a book, maybe. As for the Ultima Genomics, yeah, that was exciting. I mean, there's also, been many announcements in the genomics world that have failed to live up to the hype. So I'm looking forward to actually seeing an instrument in action. But I've read a little bit about how it's supposed to work, and it definitely sounds promising.
It reminds you of Halcyon, I guess, in a way.
No, I mean, Oxford Nanopore, they made some pretty strong claims and that were not lived up to. But this one looks, I would say, I have a pretty much higher confidence in what they're doing.
Interesting. And
I think we also need a $100 synthetic genome. I'm a big fan of Andrew Hessel's been talking about this for a long time, and I think that there are some interesting potential ways to do that. So yeah, it's not just the reading, but we need the writing too.
Yes, and certainly Jose is quite a talented writer, and he has spread the ideas of longevity to many countries. The Death of Death is a bestseller in some of those countries because in those languages, it is one of the only gateways to the longevity field that many people have. And I own a copy of The Death of Death in Spanish, though I have to say I am looking forward to the release of this book in English, as I think all of us are in this salon. Daniel Twet also writes, perhaps someday, Jose, you could create a version of The Death of Death for dummies for a really general audience. So that's just a suggestion that I will leave out there. David Wood writes, one more point about Kurzgesagt, since David is a fan. 8 of their videos have already been included in the Vital Syllabus selection, and others are shortly likely to be included as well. David Wood, of course, is compiling the Vital Syllabus, which is a sequence of videos from various sources about topics such as longevity, transhumanism, artificial intelligence, the singularity, good habits of thought for a futurist to exhibit. So I would highly recommend that as well for anybody who's interested, not just in a longevity career, but in transhumanism more generally, and becoming a more effective advocate for these ideas. Didier Cornell writes, +1 with Mark. For Didier, the number 2 problem of startups is that if they find something, they will try to have patents on it, and then this will be less available in terms of the community having access to the breakthroughs than if the breakthroughs were publicly funded. Of course, Mark, you have offered the possibility of a focused research organization as a way to get around that. And then in terms of the failure rate of startups, John H. wonders, what is the overall failure rate for startups? His guess is it's probably quite high. I'm curious, Mark, if you have some insights with regard to biotechnology startups in particular. Could you make a generalization, like out of every 100 biotech startups, X of them make it past year 5?
Well, biotech is usually a longer play, so it can take longer for something to fail as well. I've heard numbers like 10% success, but it depends on how you define success as well. Like, is an IPO that a success? That's a success for the investors, but maybe the drugs don't actually really do much, and so it's, I don't know if you would count that as a success. Yeah, I don't know. It is pretty low though, I would say. In terms of IP, I agree. Like, the IP framework that we operate under is probably not ideal. I think maybe a system of prizes where if you win a prize, you also, like, say you come up, you could set a prize for like an Alzheimer's drug, and if somebody actually develops the drug, they can claim the prize, but in exchange for claiming the prize, they have to open up for generic production immediately. Things like that, I think, could be good if our government was a little bit more willing to be experimental. And this is an area where I think countries other than the United States have an advantage, because the United States' government is very slow moving and not very innovative. So smaller countries could try to do things like this. And if they can demonstrate that it works, then the bigger countries might follow along afterwards.
Interesting. And of course, you have had quite a bit of knowledge of the Methuselah Mouse Prize since you were involved in the community during those years. So how would you assess the results of that prize offering? It was definitely a core focus of the community during the mid-2000s, and there were 2 notable recipients of the prize, Andrei Bartke for the longest lived mice, and he still holds the record from 2001 with his genetically engineered dwarf mice that lived nearly 5 years, and then Steven Spindler for the rejuvenation prize, taking middle-aged or somewhat elderly mice and turning back the aging clock on them using caloric restriction. So in terms of the broader impact of the Methuselah Mouse Prize initiative, how would you characterize that?
I guess I'm personally not super excited by any of the interventions that involve the nutrient sensing pathways, because I think the best case scenario for what you're going to get in a human is not very large of an improvement, actually. And so especially if you're talking about a human that's otherwise takes good care of themselves, right? Like, because a lot of these calorie restriction studies have like the sort of problems of like these mice are actually like living under stressful conditions, and comparing to ad lib is not a very good control. And there's a lot of problems with these studies. And I think if you like take a sort of serious skeptical look at it, like you realize that like the potential upside for humans is actually not huge. I'm more interested in technology development, like gene delivery. Like how do we like turn genetics into like a thing where you get your annual genetic software update? I think that's the type of technology that we need if we actually are serious about this. And so I'd like to push people more towards that type of work, which is actually harder, which is why maybe not as much of it happens. But I think that's what we need to focus on as a community, is the sort of the next generation technology development, and not be so focused on like hoping for some kind of low-hanging fruit that might not exist.
Interesting. And I could definitely see your point there. In fact, we held a virtual Enlightenment Salon with David Goebel, the founder, one of the founders of the Methuselah Foundation, along with Aubrey de Grey. And we had a great conversation with him on September 6th, 2021. And he explained the pivot that the Methuselah Foundation had made since the days of the Methuselah Mouse Prize, where the Methuselah Foundation is now directly investing in companies that are pursuing research breakthroughs in human health and longevity. So his view is that the Methuselah Mouse Prize provided a proof of concept, but now the real work that remains to be done is on human aging. Our friend Didier Cornell writes with regard to your comment about the suboptimal regulatory environment in the United States, which I think resonates with all of us here. Sadly, the European countries, particularly those of the European Union, are not going faster than the United States, and often, unfortunately, the situation is the other way around. I'm wondering if you could comment a bit on what you see as the comparative advantages and disadvantages of working in the US versus working in other parts of the world, in terms of somebody who wants to make the most impact as a longevity researcher. Where could they make the most headway, and what would be the obstacles they would face in various jurisdictions?
I mean, this isn't my area of expertise, but I can like just give some brief comments. I would say that the United States has the advantage of having probably the most money available in terms of like investment opportunity, and even in like government investment in this type of technology. So that's a big advantage. Also, the talent pool is very heavily concentrated in the United States. And so if you're trying to build an organization or a company or a nonprofit or whatever, it's like you need to staff it, and it's harder to do that in other places. And also just all of the things that you need to buy are harder to get in other places. I think that's probably improving gradually over time. I think if you're trying to do something outside of the United States, you should try to really focus on what is like the sort of local advantage. I mean, sometimes like in the semiconductor industry, like most of the design work is done in the United States, but the manufacturing isn't done in the United States. In fact, it's because there's advantages to doing the manufacturing elsewhere. So I think as a international community, we need to try to figure out, okay, what are the actually unique advantages to doing things in other places? And sometimes it might be clinical trials, or it might be that there's variation in cultural norms in terms of what kind of research is acceptable. I think there's a lot of conservatism in parts of the world, and so like places that might be less conservative in certain dimensions should double down and focus on taking advantage of that. But we also live in a sort of a globalized world right now where that's not it's sometimes it's easier said than done. So I'm not 100% sure there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, thank you for those insights nonetheless. And I think it's definitely worthwhile to consider the comparative advantages and disadvantages of working in a particular location. You mentioned the talent pool as a significant advantage in the United States. I'm curious with regard to your thoughts of how feasible it would be to run a kind of distributed research operation, a geographically distributed research operation. Obviously, one needs to have scientists in the lab conducting the research, but could one have the other conceptual operations of the business distributed throughout the world? So you might have the CEO in one location, you might have some other professionals like the ones responsible for the finances of the business in another location, and then the lab workers are essentially hired from wherever the talent is concentrated. But does the CEO really need to be, say, in the Bay Area where it's expensive to live? Or could there be more of a geographical spread for the same organization, especially now that remote work has become much more widely adopted?
Well, I mean, there are multinational corporations in other industries that do pretty well, or even in pharma, you have like different functions in different places. So it's definitely doable. My background is startups, and so my experience is mostly working on small teams in the same room, where when you have a question, you can just turn around and poke them in the shoulder because they're right there. There's no delay. There's no time delay. You kind of develop a bit of a hive mind sort of situation where you're like completing each other's sentences, and also the energy level of like being in a team physically like that. It's not really comparable. I've never seen a distributed team have that level of energy in my experience. I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to do, but I think especially if you're doing difficult technical projects, and especially in biotech where it's not yet all in silico, like if we got to the point where we could, we had cloud labs, we had warehouses full of automated instruments, and you could do a biotech by just writing scripts on your computer, then that maybe would be a different situation, but we're not quite there yet. So maybe we should put a lot more energy into getting there, because if that model existed and worked, then yeah, people from all over the world could be contributing a lot more. So I think building that type of infrastructure and the technology development necessary to make that realistic might be like really critical path in terms of accelerating progress.
I'm curious about that. What kind of automation do you mean exactly? You had mentioned that you was doing something in the lab, and it was like, oh, this would be better if it was automated. What exactly do you mean? Which parts would be good for automation?
Well, I think there's different types of science that are done. There's a sort of like artisanal science where you're just like, you're pursuing hypotheses, you're doing sort of new research, coming up with new ideas, then it'll often mean new methods, new techniques, and it's hard to automate that because it's just such a it's so, you need to be really flexible and creative. And automation is better when you're doing large scale things. Like for instance, say you wanted to like fully characterize chemically everything that changes in the human body with age. Because right now, I use the analogy of a star field. Like our understanding of biology is a lot like a star field, because we have all these bright spots where people have been like, I study lysosomes in macrophages, or I study mitochondria in like cardiomyocytes. And so we have these bright spots, but most of the sky is still dark. And I would like to see more projects where you're not following a hypothesis. You're just like cranking away. Like you get like 100 different single cells from every different tissue of the body, and you do full multi-omics on them, and you do that for every age of human beings, and you do that in humans of different genetic backgrounds, and then you try to build computational models that can learn off that data the dynamics of how things change over time, such that you could like make predictions about if you changed aspects of that biology, what would be the effect. And those are just giant sort of crunch away things where you can automate those types of programs. You can just have like a liquid handling robot. You can have cell culture. It's all just done by robots. And the assays to look at the cells and see what they're doing can also be fully automated. So it's when you're trying to crunch away at large, like repetitive tasks. But I think there's a lot, like I think most of what we should be doing is actually falls into that category at this point, or at least half. And right now it's probably it's heavily leaning more towards the artisanal science approach, which has its merits and is very important, but is overrepresented, I think. And yeah.
Yes, this is quite interesting. I actually several times have taken a tour of Dr. Bill Andrews' facility at Sierra Sciences in Reno, Nevada, and he has some impressive robots there that are able to analyze hundreds of samples at a time. Indeed, his bottleneck these days is he doesn't get enough samples to analyze to fully utilize those robots, but they could have some amazing throughput. Also, of course, Alex Zhavronkov's company in silico medicine is trying to translate a lot of these analyses into the virtual realm, the digital realm. And one of the value propositions of that, for instance, is one doesn't have to sacrifice actual mice to do certain experiments or other lab animals. In cases where the biology is well known, then those experiments could be conducted without the loss of life and the expense that is sometimes involved, though, of course, sometimes the loss of life can be remedied through better protocols. I don't believe that mice or other lab animals should be killed at the end of the experiment. Indeed, if the goal is longevity, then they should be allowed to live for as long as possible. And the researchers should see what happens. Maybe there will be some surprises. So what do you think about the in silico approach? And can it be conducted in a way that would be able to reflect some of the surprises that might not be pre-programmed into a digital model of an organism's biology?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with, I think it's always good to minimize suffering, less death. I mean, so when it comes to animals, like it's kind of an unfortunate thing to have to use them. And I feel pretty strongly that we should actually have our animals living in much richer environments rather than in the small cages for two reasons. One is like it reduces their suffering, but the other is that you actually get better data that way. It's more expensive, but I think there was a study, and I was struggling to find it the other day because I was telling somebody about it, but a lot of the lifespan improvement studies that exist in mice, you can get just as big of an effect by putting the mice into a richer environment where they're not just chronically depressed. Like, so if your baseline mouse is chronically depressed, then, and all you're doing is like maybe starving them such that so they don't have the energy to, like, you know, and maybe they just like sleep more or something, and that's why they live longer. I don't know. But like, yeah, I think we could have better mouse studies. There is also anencephaly as an option where you actually have animals that don't have a fully functioning brain, which maybe seems a little bit weird and kind of like, I don't know, scary sci-fi dystopian, but it does result in less suffering. And so anencephaly is maybe something that should be explored more for models.
Interesting. Thank you for that response. And if it is the case that mice in labs live in suboptimal environments and there is more that could be done to improve those requirements, then perhaps some lifespan records of mice have yet to be set. Do you have any thoughts as to why there hasn't been a concerted research effort to try to see if any mice could beat the record set by Andrei Bartka's mice? Is it just set of funding limitations for the researchers? Is it that not many researchers have the time or the bandwidth to wait 5 years to see how long their mice remain alive? What do you think is the reason why there hasn't been steady progress in that area, why we don't have 6 or 7 year old mice today?
I think it's expensive. Definitely it's expensive, and a lot of like researchers operate on grants that are, you know, they're chunks that wouldn't be big enough to do it, or they're also just like time horizons are not big enough because, like, you know, a postdoc might be around for 2 or 3 years, and so you have to finish the study in that time plus the amount of time to write the study. So I think the way academic research is structured, it certainly doesn't incentivize that. This is where organizations like the National Institute on Aging should be, you know, picking up the slack and being like, hey, we'll cover like a large portion of the cost. And I think there are some programs like that, but it probably should be scaled up quite a bit more. I think there's been, when it comes to like drugs, I think there's an over focus on drugs, and like we're already into the diminishing returns as to what drugs will be able to achieve. And so I think maybe people are just over focused on that, and we should have more projects doing sort of large scale genome modification. Like we could make, much like large libraries of genetically modified mice with like multiple genetic modifications. And that's just, it's the price is coming down. So I imagine that stuff is going to start to happen. But yeah, I think this is where you need maybe an FRO or the NIA to step up, or some other organization to step up, because it is basic research over long time horizons that's very expensive. So it's hard for like an individual academic lab or startup to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you, Mark, for those responses. And Daniel Twet writes, on the basis of your comments, a hypothetical lab mouse might say, I don't have enough energy even to be depressed. Didier Kernel writes, +1 with Gennadi's testing animals for life extension, rats or mice, and killing them in place of seeing how long they live is absurd. And he points out, to be honest, to kill some animals to check some aspects is useful, but to kill them all is absurd. And indeed, I take a lot of issue with these standard research protocols that are in part cost-saving measures, but in some cases, they're even mandated by organizations such as the FDA, which is the greatest travesty. So there was a situation where David Ishii, a biohacker, was performing experiments on Dalmatians to see how long they could live and to cure certain rare genetic disorders within them. And the FDA got wind of his experiments, and they sent him a very threatening letter, essentially saying, if you want to create genetically modified animals, then the animals are considered to be drugs, which is an absurdity, but the FDA has authority over food and drugs, and clearly the Dalmatians aren't food, so they tried to shoehorn them into the drug category. And then the FDA said, well, if you want to do experiments with these animals, you have to follow standard protocols, which involves, quote, proper disposal of the animals after the experiments are concluded. So that is quite a travesty.
Here's a great example of where maybe just doing something not in the United States would be great.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And
are you saying
now,
go ahead. That part of the FDA's procedure is to destroy the animals afterward? I mean, that just makes no sense on its face. I mean, that just seems, not right. I mean,
yes, it's because they're genetically modified animals, and I think the FDA standard protocol is to destroy them after the experiment for fear of some sort of cross-contamination with the non-genetically modified population. But it is a moral travesty, in my view, and one reason why, at the very least, significant reforms to the FDA are required. Now, we have an opportunity for about 5 more minutes or so for our panelists to ask Mark any additional questions or make any comments that you would like him to hear. So anybody who would like to do that, Jose, please go ahead.
Well, just wonderful conversation. And then Mark, welcome to Spain. We will try to organize something in the beautiful, immortal Canary Islands next year. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jose. And now we go to David Shoemaker.
Yeah, Mark, earlier in the presentation, I think you mentioned something about having a marketing background with your startups. And that got me to thinking about all the people that are applying for summer camp in this case, and whatever you do in the future. Maybe people that are brand new to being exposed to longevity as a career or whatever. So I'm curious, with your marketing background, what you're thinking about those lists of people, keeping those names, keeping the people that obviously come to the camps and other interactions, but even the ones that don't. Maybe there's a fertile ground there to be able to somehow share information with others that are in the longevity community, to kind of keep this whole army together and to let them be exposed to, well, like the USTP where we're at today, but then other longevity organizations as well. So if I heard you right about the marketing piece, give me your thoughts on that.
Actually, my background is not marketing at all. I've learned marketing I've never done any marketing before LessDeath, unless you count making a pitch to VCs. And those were generally maybe information rich, but they were not slick. They were just trying to explain what we were doing concisely. So it's not my background. I do think that, community is important. I used to be, before I got involved in research, I was on the Longevity Forum, which way back in like 2004 or 5, I think, which at the time was had a different name and was one of the only places you could go to like talk to other people interested in life extension. And that doesn't seem to be super active anymore. Social media seems to have replaced a lot of this stuff, and maybe not like, so we used to have these like online forums, and now that social media has replaced that, I think it's maybe not as effective. Actually, it's like an inferior product in some regards. So yeah, in terms of online community, there's definitely room for that. Yeah, I'm not sure what the best path though is, and and you should check out Longevity. I mean, maybe we should just revive that and because I know a lot of people are getting tired of social media at this point. So maybe there's a way to create create something else or improve or get back on something such that we can have a more cohesive online community.
Yes, and Longevity is still around. I have linked to it here. It does seem to be the case that it is not as active as it used to be in the mid-2000s.
Yeah,
However,
but I'll also say they're sponsoring the LessDeath summer camp, and so I definitely, and it was a great resource for me when I got started. So it would be cool to see it revive if that's possible.
Yes, absolutely. So anybody who wants to go over there and engage in the forums, please do so. I post there on occasion. I have an article there on the Marquis de Condorcet, if you're interested in learning some history of the precursors to the longevity field, certainly one of the great Enlightenment philosophers. Now we have about 2 more minutes with Mark. So does anybody else want to ask him a question? Let's see. So I'm not seeing any one of the panelists wanting to ask Mark another question. So Mark, I would like to offer you the opportunity to make a closing statement. Anything else you would like to say to our audience?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm enjoying sort of engaging with the community more, because I was sort of heads down just working on technology for a long time. And now I used to be more engaged with the community when I was a student. And so it's fun. It's fun to get back socializing with you guys. And I would just say, spread the word. obviously there's limited spots left for this event, but I still love people to apply, because then we have them, even if they don't make it to this one, we can ping them when the next one is going to happen, and maybe it'll even be in a location closer to them. So I'd love for you guys to help spread the word. I mean, like I said, I'm new to marketing. Post on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. You can find on our website, lessdeath.org, links to the Twitter and the LinkedIn feeds where you can repost. So yeah, just spread the word. And we're looking for people that our target audience is people who are passionate about maximizing human health and longevity, but aren't already working on it. And sometimes reaching those people is difficult, because they might not necessarily be in these communities. They might have just read some science fiction and think it's a really cool idea, but they're not actually engaged with the community. So I found, like, if you have access to, say, a university's chemistry department's mailing list, because you went to that department and you know somebody there, and they can post about LessDeath, like, those are the kind of places that I think we could, if people know sort of channels like that, that's how we can reach more people. So please just spread the word. And yeah, that's what I got.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for joining us today. And once again, we have the link posted here for anybody who wishes to apply to the Longevity Summer Camp. Congratulations on getting the response rate that you have gotten. And hopefully it will be such a productive experience for the attendees that it will be replicated many times over, and you'll be able to accommodate everyone who gets onto the waiting list. So definitely a worthwhile experiment to pursue. Our friend Didier Cornell would like to thank you for this interesting conversation. And we are going to stay on for another 18 minutes or so to address the remaining comments from our viewers. So there will still be a bit more opportunity for engagement. But for now, Mark, I wanted to tell you, live long and prosper, as is customary for our virtual Enlightenment salons. So thank you. And now I'd like to go to some of the comments that our viewers posted. First of all, thank you to Alan Crowley. He says, thanks to all, great salon today. And Didier Cornell writes, Longecity is one of the last classical forums still existing, less active than before, but still active. And he definitely is correct about that in terms of the ability to engage with a focused community. Classic forum is better suited for that purpose than today's social media networks, which kind of put everybody in the same pool, so to speak. And yes, in social media networks, you could have focused groups like the Facebook groups, but it's still not the same, because one gets all of these messages and notifications about other groups or about people from one's main feed. And that does tend to disperse one's focus. So it would be interesting if a return to the more subject-specific forums could be achieved as a result of general disillusionment with social media. I'm wondering if anybody else on our panel has any thoughts on this.
I think that the social media is going to evolve into something that kind of encompasses, everything. And I mean, there might be them silos of, specific issues like what you were mentioning, but I think it's going to encompass, more, and because there'll be more tools. And interestingly enough, recently we started checking out this new platform called Sway, which is very interesting. It uses AI to help you to better write a proposal, and it looks like a possible tool we could use for generating policy planks for our platform. We got a thing started called the Wisdom Council. Other than that, the Ageless Discord, that Ageless project with Daniel Solinger, that's going pretty good. They got they got some film. I haven't seen it yet, but he told me about it. So pretty soon we'll probably have to have him back on and update that process and stuff. So that's all going good, but figured I'd throw in them updates real quick.
Yes.
Back to you.
Certainly. Thank you, Jason, for those updates. And we definitely want to explore a variety of possibilities for collaborating online and sharing ideas in a way that might overcome the flaws of conventional social media, everyone swimming in the same pool of information, and perhaps some of these approaches that are more subject specific could also be less acrimonious, though I have had some experience with online forums in the mid-2000s, mostly related to the philosophy of objectivism. And I found that a lot of the times those forums did tend to degenerate into infighting and people nitpicking over very small differences and kind of missing the bigger picture. So any online community needs to preserve a kind of intellectual tolerance and ability to see multiple perspectives, an ability to understand that people who are interested in a particular field, especially those who want to advance it, are essentially all on the same side and should treat one another accordingly.
We should remember that the algorithms that the social media platforms have that are screwing everything up and, pushing our fear buttons, well, they're made that way on purpose. So, people can make algorithms that work the other way too, and make us get along better. They just didn't do that. So, that's why I've been following Ben Goertzel's work, and he's been working on, I like his ideas for the future of social media. And that's how I found that Sway platform, was actually through Singularity U. And so, yeah, I mean, it can be better. They haven't been writing the algorithms to benefit us. They've been writing them to take advantage of us.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the motives of those who design the conventional social media algorithms, they are to maximize engagement. And unfortunately, the algorithm designers found that motives such as fear and outrage work better at keeping people glued to the platforms. We actually don't want people to be glued to the platforms. We want people to use the platforms to leverage their ideas for constructive projects. So you shouldn't be spending all your time online. You should be spending most of your time working on projects of concrete significance. You should use online resources to help you do that. Now, our friend Walter Crompton writes that he likes the idea of a summer camp. It is mostly about networking and inspiration. We can get more information on the net than we can read in 100 lifetimes. So it is not directly about science education. And I agree, it's mostly about getting people to connect with one another and figure out what individuals are working on and what are some possible career paths for those who are interested in contributing in greater detail to the field. Ampero writes, the opportunity to do research is not common. Plenty of people with STEM degrees are not working in STEM. There are far more people with biotech-related degrees than there are biotech-related jobs. So again, that goes to the point that the talent bottleneck isn't about a lack of interested people or even a lack of skilled people. It's about matching the interested and skilled people with projects where they could make a difference. And in part, it's an awareness gap. that needs to be breached in some way. And hopefully the Longevity Summer Camp will do that by getting these interested and talented people connected with projects where they could contribute. Now, Jason, there is a question for you. Whose work have you been reading on useful nudging? This is Alan Crowley asking.
I haven't really, but a friend of mine has highly recommended the book Nudge. I plan on reading that. I'm curious, have I been using some smooth tricks by accident or something?
I have read the book Nudge quite some time ago. It was by Cass Sunstein and Louis Toller, I believe. And it's about essentially government policies that could be structured to not be coercive, but to kind of steer people toward making certain decisions and not others, like whether to design a system as being opt-in or opt-out. That's a very basic example of a nudge type of strategy. So
that book is definitely on my reading list. I just haven't got there yet. You know?
Understood. And of course, there are many books on all of our reading lists. I wish we had more time. This is one reason why we are supporters of indefinite life extension. There is just not enough time to pursue all of the wonderful opportunities, including educational opportunities, that we have at our fingertips already. Our friend Alan Crowley also writes that Alcon, a large eye company in Fort Worth, Texas, have spun out 2 startups out of every 40 that they've tried, and they have money, resources, and incentives. So that's a 1 out of 20 or 5% success rate for a company that specializes in cultivating startups. That just speaks to the extremely large rate of failure of startups. So that's a 95% failure rate, and that's fairly consistent with other figures that I have encountered. So it does seem to me that the startup is not the best model for pursuing this kind of research. We need longer lasting institutions that can champion these research projects to conclusion, because if most startups, the vast majority of startups, fail within 5 years, even the biotech startups, which, as Mark pointed out, have greater longevity, then who is going to invest in making mice live longer than 5 years? Who is going to invest in making humans live longer than 122 years with that kind of failure rate? So I would invite any thoughts from the panel on superior modes of organization as contrasted with startups. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's part of I've been liking this this guy Sichuan. I can't pronounce his name exactly right, but he's the CEO of Sway, and I think he's got some really good ideas on how to put together some decentralized organizations. It's one of the things he uses is if you make a proposal, you can choose to make it anonymously, you know, or not, or even if you vote on a proposal, you can vote anonymously. That way, you know, you don't got to get mad at your buddy for voting against you, because he didn't know. So, but I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be the future. So,
yes. Thank you, Jason. And Ben, do you have some thoughts on this?
I'm not going at the startup thing so much. So anybody else that's having thoughts about that, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you. Please hold your thought. So going back to the social media thing, I guess I really don't check out the chats and really try to get into all the chats so much. I really engage best on this topic and other similar topics through in-person conversation, or at least conversation in this kind of forum online, actual seeing faces as we are sharing our thoughts kind of thing. I did want to come back to, Ampero had a comment that you elevated early on, Gennady, about like these high school or college level transhumanist groups or something like that. That's a little bit how I got connected to USTP, was through through taking over the Madison group when it kind of was becoming defunct. And I found a guy in Atlanta to talk with me for like 10 sessions back, summer of 2020. So I want to bring it back to you, Gennady, and if David Wood is still on, about how do you best engage in these ways, in these video type forums? Do you prefer in person? How hard is it to have good progress within the session? Like, how much do you feel like you're hurting us while we're having a group conversation versus having it be wide open and it just starts getting too crazy? Pros and cons of your experiences thus far.
Are we like herding cats?
Well, it's an interesting question, Ben, and thank you for posing it. I have about 4 minutes. I'm not going to take all 4 minutes to answer it. I will say there are benefits to having structure in a conversation, in the sense that we get to probe into certain areas in depth. But I realize at the end of each salon, there were also many roads not taken. And it would be fruitful to take those roads at some point in the future. And certainly all of our discussions over the past 2 years and 1 month now have certainly opened up many roads that I would like to see other people pursue. It's why at various conferences there are breakout sessions for people who are interested in taking conversations in certain directions. However, even there, I wonder how many of the insights in those breakout sessions are memorialized and then later made available to others, and then how many others follow up on those conversations. So I think it would be good for more people to actually go back and watch the recordings of prior salons and make suggestions about which of the roads that were suggested in prior conversations we should follow up on and maybe structure future events around. But we definitely have a lot of promising areas that we could delve into further. And before we conclude, I also wanted to highlight some recommendations from Walter Crompton. He writes, one great place to get started is the Shiki Science Show that's hosted by Eleanor Shiki on YouTube. This is a series that is easy to watch. He would also recommend Josh Middledorf's book, Cracking the Aging Code, which he considers to be a great read. So thank you for those recommendations, Walter. Our friend Daniel Twett writes, this is a comment on advocacy. You don't sell a television by describing the inner circuitry, but so many intellectual types fail this way. So I think this speaks to the desirability of many different approaches. A longevity advocate isn't necessarily going to have the same focus as a longevity researcher. A longevity researcher does need to know about the inner circuitry of the human body, so to speak, obviously, in order to make those breakthroughs. But when appealing to a layperson audience, we have to keep in mind their level of familiarity with the subject, as well as what we want them to get out of it. So we want some people to become researchers. We want the rest of the public to support the researchers. We want the rest of the public to advocate for policies that are actually going to make this research a productive endeavor in terms of medical treatments that can extend our lives and extend our health. Ben Ballweg writes in our internal comments, sell the sizzle, not the steak. So thank you for that analogy. We have 1 minute remaining. Does anybody else want to comment on today's session?
But we got Sharif next week, so that's going to be good. It's pre-recorded, but we'll still all be in the chat. He's got some interesting stuff coming up. conference on Tesla.
Absolutely. So Sharifuddin Ahmed Rana is our Director of Foreign Relations. And next Sunday at 1 p.m. U.S. Pacific time, you will want to tune in to hear what he has to say about his endeavors with the World Talent Economy Forum and the Conference on Tesla Technologies in the 21st Century. And finally, I'd like to thank Alan Crowley once again for his generous contribution. He writes, thanks for volunteering to do that, meta-analysis of prior salons to determine which rabbit trails we didn't follow and determine the ones that would be most fruitful to pursue in future salons. And I think everybody can help with that. Just watch the prior videos again and let me know, or let our other officers know, which of these paths should be explored in future sessions. And with that in mind, I believe we are at the conclusion of today's session. So thank you to our panel. Thank you to Mark Hamalainen for joining us earlier. Thank you to the audience, and live long and prosper.